Let it go, let it go. Not gonna do CARM anymore. Wait a minute, 2.0. Next week, oh no, there's more. 146 logical fallacies. Here's more Matt Slick. Something that cold never bothered me anyway. Atheists err when asking for material evidence to prove God's existence, by Matt Slick. Atheists often ask for evidence to prove that God exists. They say they want tangible, testable evidence that can be verified via the scientific method. Unfortunately for them, such a request is the wrong approach. Instead, they should look for evidence consistent with a transcendent God. Let me show you why. Today's article is brought to you by special pleading. Yes, special pleading. Because a transcendent thing has not yet been proven, but we're going to pretend like it has and then argue that that's the thing that we should be looking for. Special pleading. Of all, the scientific method is a system of learning that consists of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, prediction, and theory. It is based on logic and observations of the material universe and its properties. Second, the scientific method, along with a materialistic worldview, necessarily excludes transcendence. So here we had this sentence that said, second, the scientific method, along with a materialistic worldview, which is the red herring, necessarily excludes transcendence. The materialistic worldview is a philosophy. It's not part of science. Science works with things that it can observe. You don't have to hold a materialistic worldview. And as you said earlier in the different articles here, not all scientists are materialists, as some have different faiths. The thing is that materialistic worldview is irrelevant to science. So is a theistic worldview in science, because it can only study what is studyable. If we found something transcendent, whatever that belief that is, we would talk about it within science. And thus, the red herring of including materialistic worldview in there also poisons the well of that science has to operate under this thing. No, science works because it explores what it can about reality. And if transcendence, whatever that is part of reality, then it would explore that too. Alright, let me read this full sentence again, just so that we get the full context here. Second, the scientific method, along with a materialistic worldview, necessarily excludes transcendence, that which exists independent of the universe, special knowledge. Therefore, it can't detect what is outside of the material realm, special knowledge, since it is based on observing things inside the material realm. I said special knowledge twice, so let's go ahead and throw that up on the logical fallacy counter as I attempt to not throw up all over this article. So, what's outside the universe, and how do you know that there's an outside to the universe, since that thing is unobserved and unobservable with current technology? How do you know that there's a transcendent realm, since again, this is something that is outside of any methodology to discover this thing? How do you know that these things exist? You're asserting that they do. You're saying that they do. So you're claiming to know that these two things exist. That there's an outside to the universe, and then there's a transcendent realm. And maybe the transcendent realm is the outside of the universe. I don't know. Third, the Christian worldview proclaims a transcendent God who exists outside of and independent of the material universe. In other words, the Christian God is not dependent upon the natural universe or its properties for his existence. Well, all of that's irrelevant because you're appealing to circular reasoning and you're using special knowledge times two the first time to know that transcendent is a thing, and just pointing back to the Bible doesn't make it a thing. And secondly, to know that your interpretation of the Bible is the real correct interpretation. So I'd like to, at this point, just summarize the reasons why we can't ask for material evidence in a very simple sentence. Because there isn't any. There you go, it's just saved a whole lot of text on the screen here. There is no material evidence at all, period. Because if there was, then that would be something science could study. Which is odd, considering that Matt Slick seems in favor of intelligent design, although I could not get him pinned down on that point with my talk with him. But nonetheless, if ID was a real thing, then we would have material evidence that would point towards an existence of a God sort of thing, or at least something that created life in the first place. But just saying what you said here, let me just summarize this. The scientific method can only study what is in the real world. The scientific method can't study that which is not in the real world. Christianity proclaims that God is not in the world that we know about of reality, but it is in reality, but it's just in a different part of reality that we can't access with any of the tools that we can access the rest of reality with. Everyone got it? Good. Let's go on to the next point. Therefore, to ask for scientific, testable, material, non-transcendent based evidence for an immaterial, transcendent God is the wrong approach because it is a category mistake. Explained below. Oh, this is going to be fun, isn't it? Here I go. But that is not to say that there are not material evidence is for God's existence. Wait, what? Hold on. Yeah, that's what it says. But that is not to say that there are not material evidence is for God's existence. Does anyone know how to resolve this grammatical mess of words that I... Let me just put it on the screen again. Okay, so that's not to say that there are not. So the double knots cancel out. So it is to say that there isn't material evidence that is for God's existence. Right? Because the two knots have to cancel out. So it's not to say that there are not. So therefore it is to say that there isn't material evidence, or is it to say that there is not material? That's not to. This is for the of. Moving on. For example, Jesus walked on the earth 2,000 years ago as a physical man who, according to scriptures, is God in flesh. John 1:14, Colossians 2:9, and who rose from the dead. 1 Colossians 15:1-4. He showed Thomas the wounds of his crucifixion ordeal that had led to that death. John 20:25-28. They're my demonstrating his resurrection. What? They're my demonstrating his resurrection. That's what it says. Okay. This is material evidence, but of course, we don't have access to it. So it's not material evidence then. it's a circular argumentation because you're pointing to a book and pretending like that book is true without having established that that book is true. Category mistake. A category mistake is an error in logic which one category of a thing is presented as belonging to another category. For example, to say the rock is alive assigns the category of life to an inanimate object. Everyone that knows Dwayne knows that the rock is indeed alive. Okay, that was equivocation, but still. Another example would be to judge the beauty of a painting based on how much it weighs. So, what would be wrong with that? This is a category error since the category of beauty is not determined by the category of weight. Sure it is. Look at The Biggest Loser. No, bad example there. For the atheist to work from inside his materialistic, non-transcendent worldview, strawman, and require evidence for non-material special knowledge, transcendent special knowledge, which necessarily exists outside his perceived worldview, strawman, risks being a category mistake because it is asking for non-transcendent evidence of the transcendent in a form that is restricted to testable material form. It is like asking to have a thought placed on a scale. It doesn't work because they're different categories, but we can show that thoughts exist with different machines, so that's a bad analogy. But some will assert that it is fair to ask for some sort of demonstration that such a transcendent being exists. After all, if there's no evidence of him, how can we know exists? For that, see what kind of evidence should we expect from a transcendent God? Okay, I think I will. Okay, so I'm not going to read through the entire article, so you could complain that I'm cherry picking, but there's a whole article in full. These are the 3 criteria proposed for the transcendent Christian God and what it would do, even though how in the world Matt Slick knows that it would do these things is beyond me. Okay, number 1, self-revelation. The Christian transcendent God could only be known through a decision on his part to reveal himself to us since he exists outside of our material world. Also, his self-revelation would not be subject to demands of his creation to show himself, since it would be self-revelation, not external coercion. So in other words, criteria 1 is Jesus, God, has to decide to say hi to us. And we can't ask him to come and say hi to us because Number 2, authoritative. Such self-revelation would necessarily be authoritative in what the transcendent God would reveal about himself, would be true, right, good, absolute, etc., and would be based on his transcendent nature. Furthermore, his self-revelation would not be self-contradictory, nor would it be the subject of human approval for its validity, since this would be subject the transcendent to the non-transcendent, which is a category mistake. So number 2 is basically God says, hey, I'm God, this is how I work, you don't get to judge me, you don't get to say anything about me, you don't get to study me, you just have to accept that this is the way that I am, and that's just all there is to it. Tough luck. And I could be lying, you wouldn't know I was lying, but I'm going to tell you that I always tell the truth, and you just have to believe me because reasons. So, and this is my rules, and you have to obey them. Miraculous. Any self-revelation of the Christian theistic transcendent God would be a miraculous by definition and could not be explained merely by materialistic-based hypothesis. Here's the problem with miracles, as I've talked about before. You couldn't identify it, even if you saw one. Because every time we think we've seen a miracle, St. Elmo's fire, lightning, thunder, rainbows, whatever, statues that drink milk, it is readily explained by natural phenomenon. And we're not allowed to go up and test the miracle. Here's Jesus splitting up bread and somehow able to feed a whole bunch of people with too small of a loaf to feed that much people, right? We can't, like, check his clothing and make sure he's not, like, hiding bread or doing some other sleight of hand. We're not allowed to see behind the curtain, because doing that would be testing God, and we're not allowed to do that. So we would never know that it was a real miracle versus a fake miracle. We would never, ever, 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 ever be able to identify an actual miracle. Just proclaiming it's a miracle doesn't make it so. There was a recent article that said, child found alive in rubble after this earthquake. It's a miracle. And I'm like, no, it's not a miracle. It's a happenstance. Given how many people were in this tragic event, one of them surviving isn't that unlikely. What would have been probably I would have called miraculous is that nobody got hurt at all, not even a scratch. That there was a giant earthquake, all the buildings fell down, the cars exploded, the streets melted into lava, and people were just walking around like nothing happened. That would be miraculous. But we've never seen anything that defies the laws of nature as we understand them. And to appeal to stories and myth and say, well, but the Red Sea parted. How do we know the Red Sea parted? We weren't there. And if we were there and watched the Red Sea part, we don't get to test anything. We don't get to test the wind. We don't get to test the currents. We don't get to test what's really going on. So how do we know that it's a miracle versus a natural phenomenon if we're not allowed to test it? This is a big, big problem. And, of course, we can't summon miracles on demand because of number one. Number one prevents us from asking for a miracle on demand, because only God will just decide to show up if it wants to decide to show up. So asking for a miracle, God's going to be like, no, I'm not going to give one to you. And I don't know about the authoritative part. I don't see why that's important or whatever. But basically, these three criteria are: God's invisible and it's going to stay invisible until it wants to show itself, and it's going to go, peekaboo, here I am, hi. And then it's going to go quickly back into hiding before you really notice it, kind of. So those are the kinds of evidence, which none of those are evidence, that we should expect from a transcendent God. So essentially, the same evidence we would expect to see from a God that doesn't exist. An untestable, unverifiable God. Okay, back to the other article then. Glad we cleared that up. What is left for the materialistic atheist to do? This means that the material atheist cannot logically require material-based evidence for the immaterial without committing a category mistake. So he's left with the option of trying to demonstrate the Christian worldview is internally inconsistent. After all, if he cannot show that Christian theism is false, then how can he rationally retain his atheism? So, in other words, unless he can shift the burden of proof and prove a negative universal, then he's not justified in not believing in this nonsense. And you're strawmanning because you're now just talking about materialistic atheists instead of just atheists in general. But to step into the Christian worldview and attempt to show that it is not true, the atheist must use logic. This requires the use of the laws of logic. The problem is that these laws are transcendent in that they are not dependent on the physical universe or its properties or its validity. No. No. No, 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 no. No, no. No, no. No, 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 no. No. No, no. Hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? Tell the audience why this is wrong. This is wrong! wrong. Wait, you're outright lied. Tell him it's right. Everything it says is right. Goodbye, everybody, goodbye. Wrong, you're wrong. Wrong. Tag is broken. It's very, very broken. I'm not even gonna go into tag because it's so broken. No. So step into the Christian worldview. Why would I do that? First of all, you give me no reason to do that. Secondly, logic is not transcendent. That's bullshit. It's not transcendent. It's not. I know you want it to be, but it's not. Alright, let's get through this. But the materialist theist has to presuppose the validity of transcendental logical truth in order to argue against a transcendent God and inherently self-contradictory, since he would be using transcendence to argue against a transcendental God. No, and no. Furthermore, it would mean that the materialistic atheist is presupposing the validity of the transcendent laws of logic without being able to justify them irrelevant from his materialistic worldview. Also, straw man. To presuppose the validity is to commit the logical fallacy of begging the question. That's actually what you've been doing this whole time. Conclusion: the material atheist is left without a vital means in falsifying Christianity theism, which is not his burden to do so, which means his atheism cannot be validated as being true. That's irrelevant. He cannot rightfully require material non-transcendent evidence for a non-material transcendent God without committing a category mistake, and you can't claim that there is such a thing without showing that there is such a thing, which is impossible to show. He must abandon his materialistic worldview. No, he must not. But this is incompatible with his atheistic worldview. Actually, that's not true either. That's a straw man. He cannot enter the Christian worldview, thank goodness for that, which is based on a transcendent God, which you have not proven, and use the transcendent laws of logic without being self-contradictory in his approach. That's an outright lie. Hold on. Some atheists hide behind the lack of belief excuse as a definition of the atheism, but this is problematic. See lack of belief analysis outline. It's not an analysis, it's an article, and I already dealt with it, and it's a piece of Okay, so it's at least 180 logical fallacies, thanks to that last little bit. If I was to add all the logical fallacies from tag, it would skyrocket into, I don't know, 300 some odd plus. It would beat out the Seitan Bergengate debate analysis. No ifs, ands, or buts on that. But I'm not sure how it would do on its own, the tag argument. It would rack up the points pretty quickly. The thing is flawed from start to finish because logic is based on our observation of reality. And as we understand reality better, we will refine logic to fit the reality that we observe. There's nothing transcendent going on. It's absolutely dependent upon consciousness of human brains or some other sort of conscious brains to exist at all. If humans are the only thing in the universe, and for now we'll just simplify and pretend like we are, and we stop existing, logic no longer has any meaning. The things that were true about reality during the time that we existed will continue to be true as long as there's a reality for them to be true in. Maybe the universe will run out of energy and fly off into nothingness, and that will be the end of that. There won't be anything anymore, and thus there would be nothing to base any logic on because there is literally nothing left. We're not there yet, and I personally would rather not see that. But at any rate, laws of logic are not transcendent. Matt Slick wants them to be. Matt Slick is wrong. And now for my conclusion to this series, even though there's so much more on his page that one could spend ages doing it. I'm done. After CARM 2.0 is done, that's it. Maybe I'll make one silly video about Matt Slick and that's it. By the way, if you haven't seen him on the Daily Show, it's hilarious. You gotta see it. Anyways, so in this article, Matt Slick admits that there is no empirical evidence or test for God. So that X's out my first two criteria. Going back again to my conversation with him, he should have just said, Deconverted Man, you can't ask for those two things because you're talking about a transcendent God. They don't exist. Okay, fine. What about the logically coherent argument? Now, he just said that asking for all three of those things was subjective, and he danced around and wouldn't give me a hint to any of the three, so I dropped all three, and I said, well, now what? And he said, just be a Christian. Well, that's a non-starter. That's like me saying, well, just be an atheist. I'm not going to give you any reasons, just do it. Like Nike, just do it. The original CARM articles under atheism were essentially how to troll atheists. Those are gone, and I hope they never return, and in their place is old videos that's like made in the past, as well as articles that, I don't know if they're new or old or whatever, but articles that definitely need to be shortened or just deleted. There is so many logical fallacies in these articles. It can't be addressing the atheists. It's got to be addressing the Christians. But if Matt Slick's goal is to teach apologetics and to get Christians to reach out to atheists, the worst thing that he could be doing is giving them straw man after straw man after straw man, which is exactly what he does here. So, we know from Matt's own words, there's no evidence for God. No testable, no scientific evidence. Although he said, but there kinda is, but he never told us what that is. So either there is or there isn't, and he's got to make up his mind on which one it is. But if there was, why not take that opportunity to say, and here it is? But he didn't do that, so there isn't any. So all we're left with would be a logically coherent argument. How many logical fallacies did we have again? Right, so we don't have a logically coherent argument. So, no repeatable tests, no empirical evidence, and no logically coherent argument. And unless and until we have a logically coherent argument, we must continue to be skeptical of Matt Slick's conclusions. And hey, if you like this content and you love me, please send me PayPal money it's in the thing up there somewhere. Go do that, please. If you don't do that, that's fine. But if you can do it because money is a good thing and I need it. Thank you so very much. And I'll see you next time. I'm sorry to have to say this at the end of this video, but I had to say it somewhere. So here